Okay, so clay. For the plaster we're going to use here over this cob oven, it's going to be clay, sand, manure, and straw. And probably manure or straw in some spots. So, there are three main components to plaster. There's an aggregate, a binder, and a fiber. So the aggregate, in this case, is going to be sand. We've got, today we're going to use a bunch of clay sand. It's bagged clay sand. And then a couple of volunteers, after the talking bit is done, are going to go up and Josh will tell you where to get some more sand from the site. So we'll get mass producing on the mixing. So the aggregate, in this case, is sand. The binder is clay, and manure and or straw are going to work as the fiber. So aggregate is the strength, really. It's kind of like the bulk material. It's by far the largest component of what we'll do is sand. The clay, acting as a binder, is really doing exactly what that says. Not only keeping sands together, but more importantly, binding the plaster that we're putting onto the existing substrate. In this case, it's mostly older plaster, and in some cases up front, it's kind of all the way down to the original cob. So we might do something a little bit special on that spot. And then the fiber is doing, its big goal is just kind of like providing some tensile strength, so keeping bits of sand from kind of moving around, the sand and clay from moving around, so it's going to bind them together. So the way that the binding of the clay works, though, is more on the molecular level, and you'll see how it goes, but one kind of general concept that's really important for kind of anything in natural building, where I was saying there's different routes to, you kind of make your decision early on which kind of direction you're going in. This is a lime-free building, so we're not going down coats of lime and lime washes. It'd be inappropriate to put lime washes on this at this point. Because it's a clay-based plaster all the way through, in order to introduce new elements or new protective skins to it, we always have to kind of make a layer back to what's existing. What I mean by that is, the first thing that we'll do when we actually get going on mixing stuff is we're going to make a clay slip. So with a clay slip, all it is clay suspended in water, like I was talking about upstairs. And so we'll make a nice clay slip and kind of hand apply it on. And the goal is to wet the existing clay, because we know in both the plaster and the cob there's already some clay, and we're going to make it receptive to the new plaster going on. So a little bit of clay slip is all we really need to do that. We're not going to saturate it too much water, like we hit it with a hose and wash the whole thing down, that'd be too much. The amount of sand that's in here, and everybody I'm going to kind of ask to come feel down to the original cob versus the plaster, but you'll see there's such a large sand component to the cob that too much water would just start washing it right away. Same thing goes on interior plaster surfaces. So clay plaster over a straw bale system or straw clay with chip clay system, any of those, you'll find if you really rub it down pretty hard, it'll get pretty sandy. So it's a very durable system, but the plaster in and of itself is usually not the end. There's usually something that happens after. It's not always essential, but you could do, if we've gone down the clay route, we could do a clay paint, a milk paint, an oil finish. There's a fair amount of things that kind of, depending what the final aesthetic is, if you want kind of like a glossy oil seal look, you can go for that. You can have whatever kind of color pattern that you want through a clay or milk paint. You can grow your own pigment plants if you want. If plant material doesn't usually last as long as mineral material coming from some sort of rock source does for a pigment, but you can certainly do it and try it. So what we're going to do here is pretty much a top coat on an existing system. So normally on a wall, you would have sometimes 2, sometimes 3, sometimes even more coats, but typically always what's called a scratch coat. It's kind of the first coat of plaster that when you're done applying, you come through with some sort of rough tool. It can be anything from like a hairbrush I've seen used to the Freddy Krueger look, do this, kind of give things a scratch, and what you're doing is just creating a key in for the next coat of plaster. So there'd always be a scratch coat. Sometimes, in addition to that, there would be a bulk coat, which is like it sounds like the biggest amount of material going on. Sometimes those two are just combined. and then a top coat or finish coat. And then after the finish coat of plaster, that's when you get into paints or sealants or anything like that, wax, whatever kind of thing you want to do. For this, we're just going right over, so we're not doing a 3-coat system. We're pretty much doing a bulk slash finish coat that's not really going to get scratched up too much. I brought this anyway and a couple other tools just to kind of show and explain a little, and also there might be some spots we actually need to kind of carve away at and dig down. If there's some penetrations like over here, this is kind of a special spot. I know on the bench, when we get to them, we'll show, but some of the bigger cracks, this might be a candidate for it. It's pretty brittle, like right here. We kind of peel some stuff back. You get to something a little bit more solid before going over with it. So the goal, it's kind of like trying to put a Band-Aid on wet skin. It's kind of like the same kind of thing we're going on here. Get down to where a good attachment point is.
Bryan, if you did the oil coat on top of all this, how much longer would it help it last? I mean, it would help with weather.
Yeah. So on a clay-based exterior system, probably wouldn't be a good opportunity to use an oil finish or any kind of sealant. Clay paint can kind of work as it will help seal, but that would probably be, for an exterior, that's probably as far as it would go. On an inside, interior wall system might put some sort of sealant, either an oil-based or a wax-based finish, or a milk-based finish. And they'll definitely help with maintenance. Most of those things are, not most, but more often used for aesthetics, because you can really alter the look. And it's nice, because in natural building, there's a lot of, like, the older pictures people see are kind of pretty similar, like a gray plaster and similar earth tone choices. And what's really kind of fun is just experimenting around and coming up with things that, like, by no means is there anything wrong with those. As a matter of fact, I kind of prefer it, but it's an awesome starting point. But it's not a complete project. Structurally, function-wise, it's pretty good. But then you just have a lot of chance to just do what you want with aesthetics and finish choices around. This is the one that's going on upstairs, Natural Building Companion. Some folks in Vermont who I've got to work with are fantastic writers and builders, which is great. This is a fantastic resource for kind of thinking through theory, design, and application of a whole bunch of natural building techniques. Kind of a northeast-centric focus to it as well, which is great, but not exclusively. Good one. Oh, you already got that one. Yeah, you already know that one. This one's called the Natural Plaster Book. This is, I don't know, maybe 10 years old or something. Goes through quite a bit of stuff. If there's like a single kind of entry-level resource to go for, this would be the one. A lot of great information in that. Fun stuff, tools, techniques, and that kind of stuff. This one's Build Your Own Earthen Oven, or Build Your Own Earth Oven. This is fantastic, if nothing else, when this one kind of comes around, has some glances in it. This is a wonderful oven model, and there's pictures of all sorts of like crazy things. So you can kind of simulate. Have you already seen all these?
Yeah, we have them.
You probably have all of them. Yes. This one's called the Natural Paint Book. All sorts. There's a beer glaze in here. That's pretty cool. But there's recipes on all sorts of crazy things, from like, small, very, very, very small scale things like finishing furniture or picture frames, to things that are applicable to wall surfaces using natural materials like everything from milk curds and beer, lime washes, blah, blah, blah. All sorts of great stuff. This book's out of print, sadly, because it's fantastic. But, it's a fun one on how to get all sorts of looks and textures and colors. And definitely best for last, specific to plastering. These are all pretty good resources, but using natural finishes. This came out maybe 6 or 7 years ago or something, and it's really astonishing in its reach of what plastering is about in different parts of the world, how to do it, best situations for best substrate preparation, and so on. All sorts of different plasters. It's enough information in just a couple hundred pages to kind of have your head spinning in all the right ways. I talk about work site setup and preparation. You can scale it down quite a bit because we're plastering an oven, and it's it's all pretty clear. But some of the basic concepts are minimal movement. So like the flow of material is kind of like one direction, so we're not needing to pull from too many places. So again, this is a scaled down approach, but for your own places, always think of your access and circulation of materials for construction, not just in like your garden flows. For anybody, as you develop your plans, if somebody's thinking about doing any kind of natural building project and going to have 30 to 40 people for workshops or volunteers or something at some point, or tours coming in or whatever, just please consider the amount of foot traffic. Lime is a little bit more caustic and tougher on fingers. Today, probably the biggest hazard that we'd be facing, like it's definitely important with a lot of people just to think through safety and setup issues, but I think most of it is kind of alleviated because all the clay and all these buckets behind here is leftover scraps from a pottery studio in Rumney, and they're all soaking in water. We're not working with any powdered clay. I actually brought some so you can stick dry hands in there and just kind of feel what that clay feels like. But when it's the particles are so small and fine, when you're pouring and mixing clay in those types of environments, like in a house definitely, but even outside if it's windy, it's tough on the eyes. It's probably the biggest hazard working with clay. With lime, you got to worry about your hands and splashing, and most definitely be careful and not get that splash in your eyes. I've never seen it happen, but I've heard of a professional plaster from, I forget where, but it was a project in Vermont. She had some splash in her eye, and so it was just extremely painful for many hours, and she felt lucky. She was at the hospital for hours and felt pretty lucky to not lose any permanent visibility from that eye. So lime is just one step up on the embodied energy scale and the toxicity, or at least need care of working with continuum. No, but for finished plasters, it's really, really important to have recipes very continuous over time. If you're going to do one room one day and you're moving to a different wall or a different room, getting everything very, very consistent is essential. So when you're into the finer finish work, and working with the same species of clay is really important. Technically, it's not alive in the way that we think about a lot of biotic materials, but clay is so specific, and there's so many different types of clay that it's kind of said to have, there are many species of it. I heard that once, and I kind of go with that theory because they do perform very differently. Well, we're going to go with a 3-to-1 sand to clay mix for right now. From the recycling bin this morning, yogurt containers, coffee containers, anything pretty small, but just looking for what the ounce is, or if you're going to mix like to like containers and different materials, you just want to keep them kind of pure. So let's call this one for sand and these for clay. They're the same, so that'll work fine. The clay is pretty wet, so we need to account for some. Just put these over the plate. Need to account for the water content in there. Because it's such a heavier sand component than clay component, we're going to, the dry sand is going to absorb a lot of that water, and we're still going to be adding some. It could be a situation where we'd have to be more careful of trying to drain out some of the clay and, mix in other things to get the moisture content right. But with the heavy sand use, we've got that amount of moisture is just going to kind of get embedded into what we're doing. We're still going to add. So we're not having to build such huge batches to accommodate for the moisture. So does that make sense? So that water, normally, ideally, we get a bunch of dry ingredients, dry mix them all together, and then add moisture slowly. But we're not going to be starting from that base point today. Clay. So powdered clay or any kind of potter's clay, recycle, it's pretty much pure clay, 100%. To work with site soil, actually just dig a hole from somewhere here on the farm and look for clay content. It's a major ingredient to soil throughout the entire world. It's not a rare ingredient by any means, but to get the right ratio can be pretty tricky because there's so much else in the soil. So.
And the right species.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's kind of a hodgepodge. It's kind of preferable, of course, to get to work with a material that you just got on your site. And when I was in Arizona, I was talking about that this morning, nothing came from more than 100 yards away. I mean, it's fantastic, the entire house. But, with the exception of like windows and stuff, but the entire structure and mass of the house. That's great stuff. To do that here would probably be tricky. Have you dug up and found any clay, like any substantial building quality clay over the years?
No, it's usually got, such a high content of sand or silt or some such in it that it really limits the capacity. More what we've been successful at is locating veins down in the valley. But they're there. You just have to know the right spot.
Yeah.
Some excavation.
So if we took Route 118 back out towards Plymouth until it met up with Route 25, that's the Baker River that's going right through that you drive back along. And Baker River has got a whole bunch of wonderful clay, like pure clay. I've been threatening for years now to get a couple canoe loads. I didn't bring any today, but I have a bunch of small buckets of just when I've gone out and kayaked down. I didn't yet this year, but each of the last couple of years I just go in and we do that with the kids and we paint their faces up and I grab as much as I feel like grabbing, and take some. And I just did some plaster samples for a client just maybe a month or so ago, and I used that for the plaster samples, and it was perfect, absolutely perfect. So it's around, and like Josh is saying, it's not necessarily hard to find, but when it's all mixed into a soil, to get more directly to your question of how much clay is there, you could have clay, sand, silt, and all sorts. So clay is very fine, silt is in between, and relatively speaking, sand is a large particle, on that continuum, and then there's, then it moves towards gravel and so on. But a lot of it, just that mineral content is similar, but it's just mostly based on size and format and the molecular structure. But in the clay, you can have 5% slate clay and then a bunch of sand and silt and other stuff. And it's funny because what we're doing here is essentially it's going to be a third clay, and then with a bunch of sand. So why not just use the topsoil? Because we might find that ratio is not too hard to find. To get it just right probably would be, but you can start with that and then amend it with these store-bought pure ingredients. This is definitely a strategy to use. Getting all the topsoil out and that biotic system, separating from all that and getting down to that mineral world is kind of the ideal. There's nothing preventing us from doing it other than time. But in all likelihood, we could pick a whole bunch of spots, disturb a bunch of areas, and turn up nothing worth taking all the time to filter through. And there's a series of steps you take to try to filter down to your clay. I brought some all sorts of sifters and things here, and then you can set up big systems. Sometimes even river clay that you buy, you still have to kind of grade it through. That's a 1/4 inch, 1/8 of an inch, and then smaller and smaller meshes, step by step, with tarps underneath to catch it. But it's time consuming. Yeah. Now, a day like today, when we have a whole bunch of people, that's the kind of time to do it. But we're just gonna apply. So, who wants to do some mixing? So, yeah, all right. Give them a little bit more. This is probably want to keep that one dry, but little at a time. So it's 3 to 1. So that's kind of like a baseline recipe.
So 3 cups of the sand for one
clay.
sand to clay.
Yeah. So because these are the biggest bulk, for the rest we'll probably once we have a little batch, we'll probably go through and increase the amount that gets mixed at once. So maybe do like 9 to 3 or something like that, keeping the ratio the same. But for now, we just want to get this little batch, and then we'll start including the other ingredients until we've got a little batch of our final plastic. And so the 3 to 1, that's just something that over time is a great starting point. So depending on how well it sticks, we might need to change that a little bit. We might go 4 to 1 or 2.5 to 1 or something like that. But so this is getting there. Gotta get out of my way. Stop getting in my way. I want to get in here and grab it. All right. So let's just start passing little globs around. It's not all the way there, but
You want me to keep going?
Thank you.
no, that's probably good for right now. Yeah, and anyone who wants to come grab a handful, just feel it. Mostly sand and water, but the clay helps hold it together, right?
Isn't there something like the hot dog test?
We're gonna do that. Yeah.
Hot dog worm. There, I got some worm.
Anybody else need some?
Yeah,
there we go.
Log and
So-
then where it breaks.
We're gonna kind of do this now while there's no manure or straw in there.
Yeah, that's the part where I can't do it.
Both of those are going to make this perform a bit differently. So right now we're going to show what the sand is doing by doing like a little worm test. So probably only need a little glob like this. Try kind of rolling it in your hands. Play with it a little bit. In a couple of minutes, see what kind of shape you can get it to take on. Very sandy. Pretty sticky. Right. Crumbly. So one thing we could do, I wanted to do a bit of like the worm testing and just kind of see what kind of structure you can get it to take on with no sand. Probably find a lot less. You know, like the sand is really providing a ton of strength. So I had like a 2 or 3 inch piece and was able to just hold the top of it and like just not a chance, right? So just important to kind of get that sense of like what each ingredient is doing, especially when we only have a couple ingredients. Just get to know what's doing what. So if you're trying to put some plaster up here on a pretty vertical section, you're finding it's not too sticky at all, or it's much too hard to do, you can go back. I mean, we're going to try to just get a ratio where we can have one baseline plaster recipe. But if you can't get it to stay on, then, you know, it could be as simple as more sand. Yeah. So, plaster kind of gets referred to as that. Like sometimes the timber frame is kind of like thought of as like the structure, the skeletal system. The insulation or the straw clay system would be kind of like the flesh, and then the final skin is the plaster. You know, you can kind of work that metaphor in many ways, but it's really you're just giving the house skin or oven skin. Oh, I think about this much.
And that pile right there?
That pile right there.
More?
Half of that.
After that?
Yep.
Anyone want some poop just to try it?
So the goal is to kind of see, you can feel a difference in this one from the last one.
Nice.
Hold it down, brother.
Okay,
Don't put this on your face. There's a different texture to it.
you want to roll it around a little bit? So we can see?
Sure.
So
It's sticky now. Holds a form.
brought a bunch of trowels.
You could probably make a ribbon. Not quite make a ribbon,
Yeah.
but roll it into.
Turd test.
Not quite. It's pretty moist still.
It really holds together.
What do you mean by making a ribbon?
So like, there's like a field,
The bar high
like
and every other
to steady soils. Some field operators can do a ribbon test
Now let's
and like build a ribbon. If it builds a ribbon, that means it has some clay in it, and then like if it, depending on how long the ribbon is, you can tell how much clay, sand, and salt's like in your soil. So you can do that with adobe or cob as well.
So how would you build that ribbon?
The ribbon test. So like the field test starts out. You take some soil, you get to I forget what moisture content. But if it works into a ball, you know it's not pure sand. And then you would try and make a ribbon, and you kind of just work it with your thumb and just like try and build the ribbon up. Right now, this is too moist to try and build a ribbon.
This is like right out of my shed.
But then it's like if it's less, if ribbons breaks after less than 2 centimeters, it's this category. Between 2 centimeters and 5 centimeters, that category, and above 5 centimeters, you're into like a different category of soil.
So you sort of flatten it with your thumb.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Cool.
These buckets, I think these are the 2 with just the clay slip. Let's bring one to each corner back there, and a couple of people can start kind of just with hands start putting some of that water on very lightly. You can use a paintbrush or something like that sometimes, but you're not after a lot of water in there. Just want to after dig. You can even use sponges. Hands work just fine. Journal that any major project I've done, I keep track of the exact ingredients. So if it's clay from a certain source, I would definitely write that down. What kind of sand, what the ratio was. And a lot of times on a project, you switch, like interior, exterior is different. Some have pigments, some don't. Sometimes the pigments are in such high quality or quantity that they impact the quality. So it's taking careful notes is pretty important.
Bryan, how long will that keep like that?
Longer than anything else
So you
right
just add water to it and just
Yeah.
use it?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, clay, there's really no shelf life to it.
That's good. So if you don't finish today, you can do it another day.
You can, but that brings up an interesting question. So the clay as a raw material will, but the plaster as a whole, once that dries out, is going to dry out and be done.
Well, what I'm saying is, before it gets, and once you have what you have there, you got to finish it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And most importantly, there are ways to transition your, like, if this were a big wall and there were two people doing it and 10 o'clock rolls around and your 10 p.m. rolls around, you've been plastering for 14 hours and your body's kicked and you want to stop and you're right in the middle of a wall, you're kind of stuck. So there's a couple of tricks you can do, but it's almost impossible to get just right to stop in just the right spot. You can put like little bevels on so the next time you come across you can do it, but it's pretty tricky. Normally you want to finish the field. So we've got edges and fields, and this is almost all edges. Almost everything here is a transition space, but a lot of times on a wall you've got your trim details, your window details, baseboard, a wainscoting detail, like all the trim around those things, and then like the big open fields, which are quick. So the edges usually take drastically longer than the fields. This is almost all edges, so it's like, it's not hard ones to deal with. They're all roundish, so it's easy. But like up and under, tucking in where any cracks are, up and under the wood is going to be, it's one of those you get your fingers up and in and so on. So let's see how this is. Yeah, this is really sandy. So this is, sorry for the continual turd references here, but this is nowhere, like the straw is good, and if it's what you got, great, but that manure provided much stronger. Like if I let go with either hand, it's just going to slip right down. And I don't think that's not just the water, that's just, there's not enough binding happening, or tensile strength being provided. Could add more straw, could definitely do that, or, you know, here's a local resource that we've got, so. Yeah. Okay. The manure worked really well. So.
Cob is a wall structure. Adobe is a wall structure. Straw bale is a wall structure. They all get coated with plaster.
Oh.
So we're into plaster.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
With the sun just kind of came out a bit stronger, I think we might just want to shift this right to the shade, even though it's slightly in the way. Probably better.
We just gotta move. Okay.
Just gonna keep the mortar board in the shade. Think of the exposed cob as its own coat right now. Kind of scrape it down, get a bunch of the sand out of there, put a heavier clay content slip on there, and do what's called like an adhesion coat. So using some wheat paste on its own and kind of forming like a really great bonding substrate, and then plastering that over and blending it together. If this were like a finished wall system, we would have to do that in one phase and then do the whole thing. But any of the loose stuff we want to get away, and maybe we just stuck here in a pretty wet spot. So it's kind of a smear thing. So yeah, this stuff it should stick pretty good.
Sort of using your palm.
Palm almost exclusively. Yeah, and just kind of like going up. You can. It's not even the palm. It's like these two, the fat sections on either side. I think that's kind of what works the best. You can kind of go left and right and just kind of like smear it in and just kind of feel it through. Just trying to coat the whole thing with no depressions, like no small spots that are not like. It's one thing to cover it so it looks done. It's another thing to make sure that we've got. You know, like ideally here we're like quarter to an inch, like a quarter of an inch thick is what would be pretty good. And we've got a lot of material, so let's do it. Yeah. So with a trowel, it's easier in time, but a lot harder to get started with because the edge is such a consistent thing. You can't, like, it's harder to learn to go heavier here or less here. All of these little spots, though, like, it's a very non-uniform shape. It's a very organic shaped structure, which frankly it makes plastering a little trickier, but it's going to make some spots trickier, but mostly easy because you're not after flat smooth. We're not trying to duplicate a drywall system. You know, there's no we're not after that. So spots like this are going to be kind of the hardest, and under here, you know, so. Yeah. So a lot of times I'm just going to put a lot on, and as we do this bit, we're going to fly through this. So anybody who's getting tired mixing, say I need to get subbed out, and anyone who hasn't done it yet, get on in there. But we're going to fly through this with this many people. You don't have to go right back to it yet. I was just saying in general. So.
Very conscientious.
Yeah.
If you get on that side, we
so
both, like, and then we
can see the worst thing to do, and this is something I learned the hard way, is to work one spot too heavily, trying to make it really good. The best thing to do, like with a breeze like this today, and most of it's, I don't know, I can't tell how much is in the sun, but drying out is kind of the thing that we don't want to have happen. So at some point here in a little while, we might even have people going around with just water or clay slip, just flicking it on, even the stuff that's already plastered, to keep some moisture in it. But that breeze that just kind of went through, that's the kind of thing, when this is down to, like, you know, yeah, quarter of an inch. Yeah, yeah. But that's okay. So any of the stuff that got slipped already and is drying out, just put more on. Because all you're doing is going to strengthen that molecular bond of the clay that's in here to the clay that existed before. You're bridging the new to the old through that clay slip. So if that gets slipped repeatedly, it's fine. A lot of times we have one person on a crew with a backpack sprayer just constantly going through, keeping everything moist. You know, like it'd be somebody's 8-hour shift of just spraying walls the whole time. So that moisture, like, you're just making it stronger and stronger.
So Bryan's really getting into this facet of it where it is sort of, it's almost artistic and almost like a skill you definitely get with experience to really learn your materials. With, like, a carpenter, you're learning your wood. With this sort of thing, you're really learning the capabilities. And this whole business about the moisture content, you know, changes with your mix, changes day to day with the ambient humidity, changes, you know, what the weather's been like for the past 3 or 4 days. And, like, all these locations, what he's getting at in terms of, like, sometimes if you're just doing a flat wall, and it's real consistent, you get in the grooves, it's the same sort of thing. But with this sort of structure, I mean, it's going to be a lot harder to plaster up in the bottom of this hole and get it to stick than it is just doing this flat spot. And so you just really got to learn your material. It's how to bridge it, how to join it, how to make it stick. You know, you need add a little water. It's a little too dry. It's a little too wet. How to put pressure onto it to get it to perform how you want it to.
Yeah. And Josh just went and mixed up a bunch of wheat paste here. And what that is, well, what that's going to be is an extra ingredient over here where we've got a lot of the exposed cog where the plaster is giving way through its years of use and abuse and beating on and temperature and coals coming out and whatever else. I mean, just that's the high use area, so it's naturally going to take the biggest beating. The wheat paste acts, when it's going to solidify, it's going to be like a glue, and it's kind of like the hyper poop, really, is what it's going to be doing. It's just going to provide, like, exceptional tensile strength. And so what we're going to try doing is just mixing in, like, kind of a separate batch, like same as this, one of these batches, but with some wheat paste added to it to kind of work that one area pretty special.
Oh, Josh. That wasn't a smile.
I bet it would get some body massage. Massage oil. Yeah, that too. If it's out west, yeah. Okay. That was really wet.
Yeah. I put a little bit. That would have been in my toilet. We had a load of hay sitting all winter, and we opened it up, and we were blowing it on a job site, and I was opening up the bales and throwing it through the blower.
I think it's a little thin right now. I think we're going to have to add something to toughen it up. Yep.
More sand and/or manure. I think I put a little too much water in. Easy to do, but picture trying to stick like where you guys are putting it on. Like picture trying to stick on a vertical wall.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Cool. You're getting it though. It is.
Probably will need a little more manure now because of that.
Adjusting the recipe. Okay, so this is the cow poop right here, and the cow poop is really effective for the plaster because it has a lot of mucilage type liquid that from the cow gut that's sticky and is a binding agent, and it's also the cow has taken in here and chewed, he's spit up his food and regurgitated it and chewed it several times to get these fibers so tiny. These little grass fibers, plant fibers are so small, short. And so in these poops, we're looking to use those fibers as little bits of rebar, a little tensile strength to the plaster itself. And that's why the cow poop, like we couldn't get these fibers so small to be effective at this level. It'd be very difficult to process as effectively as the cow has, as well as adding all this slippery mucilage type material. Very cool. You can also see all these little insects that have already inhabited this poop, even though it was down on the ground for only probably less than 24 hours. Pretty neat. Alright. That's the poop.
Even up here, there's not a bunch of plaster. So we're after a 1/4 inch. So about like this much plaster, Down here, there's some low spots, and in here, all the way. I'm just picking on this spot because I was already over here a couple minutes ago and saw. But, so as we kind of go through, we just kind of want to, maybe want a couple people to keep doing as is and get a bunch of plaster going, but especially as like the limiting factor is going to be in mixing. So have a couple of people just on kind of quality control, starting, maybe let's start all the way here. We're going to start on this wheat paste in a couple of minutes, but starting here and just kind of going through. So if 2 or 3 people want to volunteer for that, you got 1, 2, okay, 2's probably good. Just kind of go through, and again, we don't want to work anything too much, but something like that, take another whole handful and just go over. You'd rather have a little bit more. But so a spot like this is kind of, when that dries, that's going to flake off. So things like that, you guys will kind of work in. But down here, it's somebody worked it a little bit more solid with their hand. Some spots up here are a little patchier. There's no necessarily right or wrong, other than knowing these high spots are going to flake off when they dry. So as long as it doesn't create a low spot, it's okay. With a trowel, it's easier to level out low spots. So, or with any kind of implement, whether it's a trowel. With your hand, you're going to kind of inevitably, this is organically shaped, that's organically shaped, and there'll be some divots. But yeah, see what he's got going on here? That low spot's getting covered right up and over. So you can get more material on the wall and smooth it up even better.
Yeah, I think too, if you end up playing with this, once again, it's getting familiar with the tool and the material. So maybe sometimes if you have a little water and can rinse this off to get it, so you can get that nice smooth finish and help you get that finish on, is very helpful.
Okay, yeah, so that is
nice.
Tell you one thing, a little peppermint oil, 2 drops goes a long way.
Woo, it's delightful, huh?
It is, yeah, it's very nice. So we'll see what this does. But
so the wheat paste is just giving it a little bit more sticky?
Yeah, a lot more sticky, ideally. Essentially, you can call it wheat glue, or natural glue, even.
Paper mache.
Yeah, it's halfway there. What I did here, nothing fancy at all, but one of the batches that had been done, took half of that out and put in another canister to do as a separate batch. and then out of that took like a very, very small sample and mixed some in here. So it's the exact same recipe that we're using everywhere else. We're just adding the ingredient of wheat paste, which Josh went inside, heated up water over 100 degrees, but nowhere near boiling. You want to get it to a point where it can absorb flour. He said he put 6 cups flour in. So a lot of times you put it in a blender or just on a stovetop with a wooden spoon, mix it in really nice. And right down there in that pot is the wheat paste mix. It's cooling off nicely now, making itself into a nice building material. Any guesses as to why we might need 1 or 2 small special precautions to work with wheat paste?
Rodents would be interested in it?
You got it. It's a food source. So flour is something that has some interest. Bugs are interested. Mice and voles are interested. Are you eating something? You're making like a hyper-natural glue. That, unfortunately, will break down with moisture and will be eaten unless there's precautions taken. So a lot of times on a substrate, we would, on this, there's lots of texture, lots of places to key in. A lot of grit, a lot of tooth to this substrate. But if we were on drywall, or if we were going over plywood, or going over, what did I do? An OSB, oriented strand board, a while ago. Something that does not have much tooth on its own, you can create a lot of your own grit by putting on what's called an adhesion coat. And wheat paste is one way to do that. One way, another way, if working on drywall, you can just get some commercial, like no VOC or low VOC primer and mix in some really small grained sand and do just a sanded primer and brush it on the wall with a roller or anything. It's a really quick process. And then you can go to an earthen plaster after that.
The tinsel in it. We talked a little bit about replacements for cow poop, so maybe just add a little bit of wheat paste and then some for fiber, adding feathers or cattail strands,
Wool, recycled
wool. So there's some other options there to get
building in redundancy here. So we've got various forms of fiber, various materials providing the tensile strength, and everything we're asking of the plaster is performed by more than one material. So we've got oxen manure, wheat paste, and straw, all working to help bind, help glue in various size particles. This is getting really sticky.
Wow.
Still moist. If this dried out, this is good stuff. This is going to go over the cob, no problem.
Beautiful.
Cool. A little bit more mixing to do. So again, we need an aggregate, a binder, and a fiber. And we have one aggregate, several binders, several fibers in here. And the sand is various aggregate size. So
You gotta head out a little bit.
yeah, I don't know. I mean,
You going to cool back?
Just a dry foundation back here, or this is just a dry rock?
Yeah. The foundations that exist here, we're looking with on the center, on the cob oven portion, we dug a pretty deep hole, about 4 feet, filled it with rubble, and then dug a trench down here to daylight, so it always drains down to daylight, down below me. And then on the perimeter, we just sort of laid it right on to grade. And then on this, the sidecar, you see that slab?
Yep.
So that's just like a 4-inch slab underneath the sidecar that it just rides on like an island onto itself. So it's independent. So this guy's got a real good foundation, the oven portion, and then the side part is more or less independent as well. And then this whole perimeter, this bench, is just floating and
Freestanding floating.
yeah. It's held up surprisingly well, really, considering the frost and you know the roof is still maintained. The roof's been up for probably about 8 years. And it's all sort of held in place a little bit by the cob at this juncture. Integrated system.
There you go.
So Bryan, you just jabbing it all up in that hole?
for right now, I'm going to work with a trowel and use a sharp edge to
Poke it
get
in.
in. Just trying to get a lot of material up there for now.
Nice.
Yeah.
What is that? Oh. Where is he at with that?
It might be a little wet, but it's sticky. Put it on really heavy.
Yeah, it wants to belly out.
It does, yeah.
The weight of itself.
Yep.
Wants to pull itself away with gravity.
Yeah, with the trowel, I'll get it in there better in a minute.
Really trying just to integrate it.
Yeah. You know, the
Connect.
You want a trowel? What type of trowel?
You know, are there any small ones around?
There's a little one, yeah.
Small
that would
pointed.
be fantastic.
It's in that.
little Japanese style.
You got a pointed one? Or? That's a flat one.
Yeah, he's got a pointed one over there.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you so much. We'll do it. Yeah. There we go. Lots of material here. So, after all the plaster is fully applied, one thing that can be helpful to do is just kind of go through with a cleaner trowel than this, but is to go through and just kind of round up, whether you've hand applied or use a trowel for the plaster application, just to go through, round up, round corners, make your finishing touches. You've got a couple-hour window before some more solid setting happens, so it's a good opportunity just to kind of take in and do what you want and carve, sculpt, round, smooth, rough up. This is the time. If this were your base coat or your scratch coat, we'd actually be going through and trying to scarify this and put some indentations in all the way through as often as possible. So it's not hard to kind of round up, get a smoother look. This is a pool trowel. It's probably a bit large for the shape that we're working with here. Does the trick if you go slow. But if we are getting ready to do a second coat or another coat onto this, we would scarify this up, then go through and give appropriate key in for the next coat of plaster. As it is, a couple hours from now, we can come back and just round up a little bit more. It's getting there. It's still probably a little wet to work with. Definitely down here, it's a bit too wet to work with and round up, but a couple more hours, we can smooth this up as much as necessary. But another really vital part to all of this is what's happening right over here. We didn't chat too much about site selection, but how to set up a site. We had about 18 people, a couple of delicate plants, and let's see, and a bunch of long grass around, and couple 100 square foot space, and it didn't feel too tight, with very few exceptions. I didn't get stepped on. I don't know about anybody else, but it went pretty well. But cleanup is the next thing, and that's what's happened. That does take a little while, so it's always important to keep your volunteer pool around for another 30 minutes, or get ready to spend a couple hours on your own, just cleaning up tools. all of this stuff, it's going to dry quick. When we're down into 1/8 of an inch or less on here, it's going to dry so quick, and it's a lot harder to get off. So a trowel is easy. You dip it in, get it wet again, you can clean it right up. But buckets, tools, all things that are a little trickier and maybe water intensive, it's pretty important to just try to keep them clean as you go, clean them up quick, and not flood your work site with hundreds of gallons of cleanup water when you're done.